the Can We Talk podcast, where we focus on healing relationships and bridging the gap between the divine feminine and the divine masculine. My name is Goddess Grace Grant. Please say the goddess. And today I have my amazing hosts with me, Jonas Beaubrun, Sharell Monet, Jay Julian, and Macadopoulos Godin. How are you guys feeling today?
Doing good.
Beautiful.
Doing good.
Good. We also have a very special guest with us to join us in our discussion today. Miss Jeniece McCullough is the daughter of the late, great, legendary Bernie Mac, and will be conversing with us as we share our personal experiences of dealing with the parental wound and how it has affected our close relationships as adults. How are you doing today, Jeniece? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and I'm doing great.
Good, good, awesome. We're so happy to have you. And now for those that aren't exactly sure what a parental wound is, the parental wound, which refers to the mother and or father absenteeism, it pertains to emotional and or physical trauma from your parent being very critical, physically or emotionally absent, negative or even abusive in character. And that can impact individual relationships in so many ways.
I agree with that, actually. I have something that maybe some of you all remember from, I think it was about March, and Kirk Franklin and his eldest son had a huge blowout. They had a phone conversation, and then I believe his name is Kieran. He released the tapes. And of course, you know, Kirk Franklin, being a gospel artist, used some words that are not necessarily considered appropriate by the church. And a lot of stuff came out of that. But what I noticed was, I was reading some articles about it. His mother, his actual mother, who is not Kirk Franklin's wife, they had him at the age of 18, I believe, when they were dating. She said that they were not always the best parents because they were children raising children. And she said that she knows that she probably hurt him and that his father probably hurt him. But at the same time, she said that his father was a good co-parent. But I feel like with him, he doesn't, if that's the case, I don't feel like that's the way he's seeing it, especially with the rampage that happened over the phone. Now, we don't know if that's the first time that kind of conversation happened or not, but I feel like if this man is very close in age to me, I believe, well, what is he, 35, 30? No, he's born in 1988, so he's 30-something.
Oh, he's 30.
Yeah. I feel like if that is still bothering him at 33, then there are some parental wounds there that were never addressed. And I think that's just something good for us to keep in mind as we continue this conversation, because a lot of times we don't realize the wounds that we have until it's time for them to come out when they're not supposed to come out. So,
absolutely.
So I'm just thinking, for my take on it, it really was, I thought about maybe, you know, his father was famous, he was traveling, maybe he felt neglected at some point, or, you know, I know a lot of people that have blended families sometimes do have kind of an issue with that, but I just kind of want to know what you all feel about how that instance can tie into what we have going on in this conversation today.
Well, I have an even more specific question, if you don't mind. I want to know how each of your parental wounds have specifically affected your relationships. Like, what type of protective mechanisms do you carry within yourself that other people may see as toxic traits that you either, that you basically need to have healed pertaining to your past trauma? I do want to go first. That's why I posed that question. Because for me, it's very interesting. So when you see, my mother was in a very abusive relationship growing up. I was a little bit older, I was a teenager, but it was still abusive nonetheless. And I took a lot from that subconsciously. Now, granted, I was 17 years old, so I was thinking like, okay, I've had my own relationships, this isn't affecting me. But now as a grown woman, I'm seeing so much more how that actually plays out into my relationships now, because I used to view her as a very weak woman, I hate to say. because she was staying in an abusive relationship that did not serve her best interest. So now in my own relationships, I tend to deal with controlling issues because I don't ever want to be put in that weak position of having to deal with, you know, someone taking advantage of me. I never want to be that woman. So I end up trying to be the perpetrator as opposed to the victim in my own relationships. And that comes out obviously as toxicity. So that's something that I'm working on. I've made a lot of progress actually, but it's an everyday struggle if I'm being completely honest. And a lot of people don't realize that when you talk about toxic traits of another person, that doesn't come from nothing. Very few people are just bad people or negative people for no reason. You know what I mean? Everyone has a story. And yeah, that's my story. So what about you guys?
I think for me, mine was, and I say was because I had closure, or have closure, with my father, and you know, before he passed. But that was primarily just being able to say I love you, emotional openness. I don't think it actually resulted in something toxic, but when things get too emotional, I go hyper intellectual. That's my defense mechanism. That's how I shut. Right. And so, you know, the first time I told my dad I love you, he just looked at me like, what? You know, and then that kind of forced me to get a little closer to figure out why. And I learned a lot about my father. And then it just became a thing. I love you too. And I kiss him on the head, things like that. In fact, the week before he died, the last thing I said to my father was, get that thing fixed. Mom keeps calling me and I don't know why. I love you too. Bye. And then a week later he died. Right. So this is like 13, 14 years ago. But I guess for me, it's if there is residuals of that, it's probably like trusting in terms of like someone actually saying they have your back, saying that they're with you. Loyalties, I'm very sensitive about loyalties. That's a very sensitive topic for me. So betrayal is huge for me. So, you know, but that's how, I guess you could say I manage that. So that's the only thing that comes to mind.
It's interesting that you said you turned to hyper intellectuality. Can you expound on that? What exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, like if it's too emotional, right? Which is a weird use of terms because we all have emotions. But if it's too heavy in emotions, instead of going into the affect, instead of, you know, crying or feeling the sadness or whatever, I break it down. I understand it, I explain it, and I move on. You know,
and you see that as a problem?
It can be because it creates a barrier in terms, it makes you not so relatable to people. And so those who know me, my closest friends, they know me. They know when I'm going there. Those who don't, it's like, oh, we thought you were fine, or what's wrong with him? You know, because I want the distance. I don't want you close to me.
Wow, that's interesting. That's making me look at myself because now I am very expressive about my emotions. I'm very hypersensitive, but I embrace the full spectrum of emotions. But I process emotions through logic after I'm done expressing that emotion. And I feel like, for me, I always say the best way to express your emotions is to express them in a logical fashion. So hearing you kind of say the opposite, correct me if I'm wrong, it's interesting. It's making me take more of an introspective look because I'm wondering, like, is that a protective mechanism for me? Because I always turn to intellectualizing my emotions and, well, I can't say instead of expressing them, but I rush to understand them maybe a little bit too quickly. Jeniece, were you gonna say something?
I'm like, y'all, I need y'all to stop acting like y'all know me, because that is, I feel something, I'm like, hold on, wait a minute. So if you ride by the root of two and then come down to, okay, so I'm feeling this way because, okay, like I go into logic mode. And for me, I've struggled with depression over the years. And that keeps me stuck in whatever I'm feeling, because granted, I know what I'm feeling. I feel whatever it is, but I won't allow myself the broadness of whatever it is I'm feeling, especially if it's anger. Anger I struggle with because of my parents. That's part of a wound that I came with, because I had one parent, my father, who was just he was explosive with his anger. He would hold everything in until he would just explode. Mm-hmm. And then my mom was just passive aggressive. She would never admit that she was angry. So she would say stuff like, okay, you know what? It's done. It's over with. We'll get through this. But then passive aggressively do stuff later on and come out with it. So I didn't see a healthy way to express anger. And because my dad, like I said, he was the type that would explode. So you never knew what was the thing that was going to set him off. And once he went off, he was just, you were all kinds of everything under the sun. And it was almost like he blacked out, because once he got it out, he was done. And you're still left like, and he's looking at you like, what's wrong? What?
Wow, because he was able to release those emotions. And I always say that. I always say, specifically for men, because as your father, men have a tendency to hold back. And they don't realize that a lot of times we as women, we are so emotionally volatile because we don't keep all that in. When you keep all that emotion in, it festers inside of you, until it does exactly like, what used to happen with your father. If you get more comfortable more often with expressing yourself, expressing your emotion, hey, this doesn't feel right, a little bit at a time, then it oozes out and you don't have to go through that episode of having emotional diarrhea. So no, I feel you 100%, but it's interesting because you said you had one parent that was on one side of the extreme spectrum, and then you had another parent, your mother, who was way on the opposite side. So it's like, how do you even find that balance? How do you even begin to understand how to process emotions when you grew up with such cold responses on both ends of that spectrum?
And that was my struggle. So for me, I tried to be a fixer. If something was wrong, okay, let me fix it. You got a problem? Let me fix it. I can fix it. Look, I'm like, Stuart, look what I can do. Like, let me help you. Let me help you. And so I forged relationships with people who were emotionally immature, and I took on everything in the relationship. So it was like, even when I got married, it was the pattern in our relationship was we were happy if he was happy. If he was happy, okay, we're happy. If he wasn't happy, oh, we're not happy. Now, what do I have to do to fix it? And that resulted in being with someone who, whenever something was wrong, he pointed his finger, it's your fault, it's wrong. And I was twisting myself inside out, trying to figure out how I could fix it until it got to the point where I was like, hold on, wait a minute. This don't work.
You were basically used to walking on eggshells. Mm-hmm. And I've been there. Look at Sharell. Sharell, I know you got something to say with your face.
Oh, you know I do. Because Jeniece just told all my business, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in.
Go ahead, girl. You got it.
To piggyback off that, that's literally the same way I am, especially when it comes to romantic relationships. And I've said before, you've heard of fight or flight. Yeah. And then one of my friends, she was talking about freezing and fawning, and I'm a fawner. So if something goes wrong, if I had nothing to do with it, I'm going to take all the responsibility so everybody else can just be fine, be happy, and I'll take it all on myself. And then, I kind of have that similar trait of holding it all in. So when you hold it in and then you're helping everybody and then nobody is grateful for it and you still get blamed, even though you are doing your damnedest to fix it, it's weird. And it came from, in my household, I was the middle child. I have middle child syndrome very badly. And some of y'all know I grew up in a military household as well. And my father was deployed all the time. So a lot of times, my mama had to work. My brother was 8 years older than me. I was responsible for my sister who was 3 years younger than me. And, I don't feel like, I feel like kind of the wound came from, you're the oldest, it's your fault.
That's definitely.
Can I add something to that?
Absolutely.
From hearing you guys speak, I can identify with a lot and relate to a lot of it. My parents divorced at a very young age. Similar to Jonas, in my household, we didn't say I love you. And it's funny, and I was talking to Jay and Miguel a few days ago, in our adult lives, there's a lot of words that or a lot of definitions we're now understanding, not realizing that, wow, this is what I probably was as a child. And I use that example to talk about love languages. Even before I understood my love language, I knew it was words of affirmation. And without realizing it, my mom's love language was acts of service. So for her, she was showing her love through all the things she was doing for us. For her, it was like, I love you because I'm doing this. I love you because I'm getting you this. But for some reason in my mind, I didn't process love like that. And so because I wasn't hearing it in my household, and keep in mind, when you were a kid, you're seeing all these movies and these TV shows where that phrase is flowing easily. And you're like, I never hear that in my house. You know, and me not being affirmed through words, and my father went, and unfortunately for many men in that age group, like they looked at the relationship as a package deal. Like when my dad was married to my mom, he was the best dad in the world. But the second they divorced, it's like when the relationship was over, so was his responsibilities as a parent. And he was out of my life for almost 16 years. How that manifested in my adult life is kind of similar to hearing you guys speak. Even though my parents wasn't there, like I aspired to be in a relationship, but it was peace and it was harmony and it was love, which isn't a bad thing. The only issue though is a lot of times, even when I felt, you know, disrespected or I felt something wasn't right, I just hold it in just to keep the peace, because you didn't want to be the one to create an awkward moment or disturb the happy-go-lucky stuff, when in reality, it's like when we're constantly putting our own feelings to the back burner, we don't realize subconsciously and consciously we're teaching our partners. And when you're constantly just letting stuff slide or letting stuff go, you're creating an environment where they're not even properly equipped to recognize when something's going on with you. If you're always trying to fix stuff and you're always trying to say, no, I'm good, when you know you're not good. And in that example that Jeniece gave about her father, us men, we have this, let me pick and choose my battles mentality, not realizing that the stuff that we think we're letting go, we're not letting it go. It's just kind of building and building and building. And when that spark finally lets off that powder keg, it's an explosion when it didn't have to be, if we found ways to simply, even in those uncomfortable conversations, move with an emotional awareness and intelligence, simply saying, hey, you know, babe, when you did this, I didn't feel good about it. Or when you said this, this is how it made me feel. And kind of handling them issues as they come, when we just let it build up, and finally, like, all right, man, I'm about to explode. But for us, we feel great when it's done, not realizing, all right, you know, I got that all out. Not realizing we just created all types of chaos and destruction in our homes. And that's something I had to work out. Being able to say it doesn't disturb my relationship, to say, babe, we got some things we need to work on. Or when you said this is how it made me feel. Those emotional check-ins become a necessity when you get older, because you don't want to not be happy in your relationship.
That's real. And I want to add to that really quickly. When you talk about emotional check-ins, you said so many gems right now, but I'm like trying to pick and choose the most relevant ones right now. But emotional check-ins. So one of my favorite books that I just finished reading is The Spirit of Intimacy. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that or not, but it talks about intimacy in a ritualistic fashion. And it opened my mind up to how to handle relationships. So often we don't emotionally check in or have much needed conversations until something goes wrong. But in The Spirit of Intimacy, they were saying, make that a ritual where every week, every 2 weeks, every month, or so have you, have a ceremonial space with you and your partner, right? Like you get together, maybe light some candles or something. You may be nude, you may not be, whatever. And you sit there and you talk to your partner and you just let it all out, and you create that no judgment safe zone right there in that circle between you two. And that's your time to get it all out. Hey, you know, I didn't like when you did this, and I felt some type of way when you did that, but it's expected. So you're not just emotionally dumping on someone at the most random, inconvenient time, just because you need to get it all out. You know what I mean? So when you talk about the parental wound and healing from that and healing your relationships as a result of that, that's one tip that I definitely want to give people, because that changes things drastically because it opens up the line of a line of communication. And it's similar to premarital counseling, I would say. You know, a lot of people don't start going to counseling until it's probably a little bit too late. But, you know, premarital counseling is effective and it's great to even get ahead of that. Also, I wanted to say, between you, Mac, and Sharell, you talked about fawning. And that's making me think. I'm a very, very introspective person. So every time somebody says something, I'm turning it back to me like, do I have a problem with that? Yeah, exactly.
Gotta grab it while it's there.
Exactly. So I'm thinking about the fawning, and that takes me back to my control issue, because I noticed that I tend to take blame for literally everything. I can always find blame in myself, because at the end of the day, you know, there's a balance that you have to find, because you still have to turn back into yourself and say, okay, what role did I have in creating, you know, whatever chaotic situation I'm in? So that, you know, to say that is fair, but I'm always taking every single thing wrong and I'm turning it into, oh, this is my fault. But I'm realizing the reason I do that is because that's what gives me the control to fix it. And that takes me back to my childhood, where I was a victim and I was stuck in situations that I could not control. So I had to sit there and feel the pain. I had to sit there and suffer through it. And it made me feel weak. Going back to that same feeling that I did not want to feel. You know, I did not want to be a weak woman or a weak child or what have you. So now as an adult, I hold on to these controlling feelings. And it may sound good to the other, like, oh, she's taking, you know, responsibility, you know, all the time. But it's like, now I'm seeing that's a trauma response. So no, that's super interesting that you said that. Jeniece, I wanted to ask you about your experience growing up, right? So I'm sure Bernie was doing the best that he thought he could, as far as, or that he could, because when Mac talked about love languages, as a man, naturally, your love language is to provide, right? So he provided you with security and a legacy as a man and a father should. Did you often feel or consider him as like an emotionally absent father, or did you have an understanding that he was creating something for you for years to come?
Oh, that is such a good question. I don't know that I would call him emotionally absent. Kind of neglectful at times, because he didn't start to become famous until I was in college. Like my freshman year in college is when Friday came out. And then sophomore year, was it sophomore year? No, my junior year. That's when the Kings of Comedy tour took off. So for most of my childhood, we were broke. So he was like just trying to take any job he could, because my parents got married when they were 19. And that's one of the things I tell people all the time. Me and my parents grew up together. They had got together when they were 16 years old. So a lot of what I saw growing up were two people who were continuing a pattern that they began when they were children, when they were 16. And both of them had absentee fathers. My dad's father wasn't involved. My mom's father was similar to yours, where he was a great dad, and she said she was a daddy's girl. And then when my grandmother divorced him, he just was like, okay, well, I'm done. So they both carried those wounds. So watching the two of them like navigate their relationship that they were ill-equipped to, and they at times would use me as a bargaining chip. It was like, no, love me more. No, don't love her, love me more. No, don't love him, love me more than him. And so there would be times I was like as young as 7 and 8 mediating their fights. Like, you go sit over there. You go sit over there. Now, what's the problem with you? Okay, nope. Now what's the problem with you? Okay, like I've got a social studies test in the morning. I need y'all to fix this because I can't, like, so I was, navigating their stuff. And now that I'm older, I can recognize from my dad, I'm sure a big part of a lot of the stuff that he was dealing with was, like you said, being able to provide. And because he couldn't for so long, I'm sure that was like a big thing for him. So for me, it wasn't so much that I felt he neglected me. It was whatever frustrations he had, I think he may have taken out on me. I think sometimes he came home and it was like, I can't control, my wife won't listen to me, I can't get no job, I can't get this, but you're mine, I can control you, you got to do whatever I say. And so I think that was how he operated at times with me. So for me, it was, I knew he loved me, but he wasn't good at showing me in the way that I needed. And so I grew up, like you said, walking on eggshells. It was like, is this the day we're gonna be great? Yay! Okay, no, it's not. Never mind. All right. So, and I just never knew what to do. It's like waiting to jump in the rope for double dutch. I was just like, okay, which can I get in now? No, I can't get in now. Oh, can I get in now? Okay, yeah, I'm just. Oh, nope. Now it's not. Yeah. So I just never knew what it was. Thankfully, he and I, before he died, like I started working for him shortly before I gave birth to my daughter. And that's when he and I really started to evolve beyond that pattern. Because once I got like 21, that's when I started finding my voice, that I was like, okay, listen, I love you, but could you please, and he wasn't the most, he was like, you don't tell me what to do, I tell you what to do. And so we butt heads for a long time. Then once I got married, I think that kind of helped him like recoil, like, oh, okay, she's grown now and I can pull back. And that's when we started to evolve beyond the, you don't have to control me, sir. Like
he started respecting you as an adult.
Yeah.
As opposed to a child.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So how did his impact affect the relationship that you have with your own child? Like, what mistakes of his did you have to learn and heal through in order to not repeat the cycle for your child?
Ooh, do we have enough time for all of that?
I know it's heavy.
Well, one of the biggest things, and I tell people this all the time because everybody assumes the character of Vanessa is like me. And I'm like, no, I was Jordan. I was the sensitive one. I wasn't athletic. Oh yeah, minus the mischief. I wasn't mischievous. I was you tell me to do something, I'm doing it. Okay, but I would cry at the drop of a hat. I was very free with my emotions when I was a kid. And for him, that was like, no. So I grew up hearing from him all the time, you soft, you weak, you got to toughen up. The world's going to do you up, like you're going to be messed up. And I'm just like, but wait, like, case in point, when I was 9, I used to get bullied on the school bus, and this boy, Lamont, punched me in my eye.
You knew his name. You remember his name?
Oh, I remember. That will never forget his name. I didn't say his full name. Just tell him, you know who he is.
Put him on blast.
I ain't saying his full name, but I'm just saying. But when I got home and my dad saw it, he came back out to the bus, he cussed the little boy out, and I'm behind him like, yes, my dad got me, all right. Then we get upstairs to our apartment and he's like, so what'd you do when he punched you in your eye? I thought that was a dumb question. I was like, I cried, it hurt. Like, oh, what you mean? Like, and he just exploded. Like, he told me I was weak, I was soft, and I needed to toughen up. How dare I let this little fat so-and-so knock me in my eye? And he was like, tomorrow, you better go whoop his ass or I'm whooping yours. And I was just like, but I'm a lover, not a fighter. I don't know what to do. So that's just one example of how he was. So when my daughter was born, she's a lot like me. She's very sensitive, very free with her emotions. And I vowed, I was like, I will never, ever, ever tell her that she's soft and weak for being free with her emotions. First of all, she's a woman. She's supposed to be soft. Like, we're not supposed to be all hard. And, I'm tough on done. So for me, my thing with her has been helping her learn how to manage her feelings.
Yeah.
So I always tell her, your feelings are fine. Whatever you feel, that's valid and that's fine. But we've got to work on how you manage them. There's a time and place for everything. So everything can't be the same emotion. Like, you can't have a level 10 reaction to everything. And that was like how I worked with her. Like, she just told me before I came down here, she was like, I'm so glad to be able to be at home and relax. This is my one place that I can be myself without any judgment. And I was just like, yes, great parent moment for me. That's something that I always wanted for her.
Right. Wow. And it's interesting that you say that, because so many children, especially within our community, it's like home is the last place they can go as a safe zone, you know, as a safe space, rather. It's like that's oftentimes where you encounter the most chaos and the most trauma. Jonas, I want to say, from your perspective as a therapist, what type of experiences do you come across in this regard? And even if you have some tips to offer as far as, you know, piggybacking on what Jeniece said, how to not repeat the cycle for your own child. Do you have any advice to offer in that regard?
I mean, some of the, I guess, byproducts, if you will, of parental wounds, right? So you have, of course, low self-esteem. We've all talked about some aspect of that, right? That's come up. Anxiety. We've seen, you know, elements of that come up as well. You guys talked about depression. You touched on that. Anger and rage is one that we haven't talked about. I've experienced it from observing someone who came from an enmeshed parental dynamic. And so their rage would just pop up on you. And it's like, well, who are you? Like, who are you? You know, where did this version of you come from? To where like people wouldn't believe even if you told them, no, I've seen this person do this. I've seen this person say this. People are like, oh my God, no, never. They're such a sweetheart. And you're like, but then when you observe the parental dynamic and all that suppression that went into that style of parenting, it only makes sense, right? Issues around boundaries. Either it's going to be one extreme, right? Too rigid of boundaries, or too loose of boundaries. Hence, you know, having a sense of emotional availability for your partner, or just in life in general, or no emotions available. And some people pretty much end up wearing the proverbial mask all the time, right? In fact, I have one story of a person who their parents beat them when they wanted to join a dance team or something like that in college, a young lady. And so grew up to become an adult, all the degrees and everything else. However, like watches Dancing with the Stars and all these other shows like profusely, you know, as a vicarious form of existence, right?
Wow.
But in therapy, you also learn that when you show people a mirror too fast, they hate you for it. They don't thank you. So figuring out ways to do it, if you get to do it at all, is a whole other conversation. I think closure is a very important piece. You know, being able to, if the parent is alive, figuring out a way to have that conversation, but with fair warning. You know, as you get older, this thing becomes more and more rigid. It's not as elastic, so people are not as flexible in their thinking as you'd like to believe they are, just because you tell them, you know, you hurt me when, and so on and so forth. That doesn't register sometimes, you know. And so figuring out ways to get closure. Sometimes direct confrontation, of course, therapy is, you know, one of the top ways that I always say. I recommend that having a space where you can have some source of a catharsis, right, where you can talk about it and let that out. And, you know, visiting aspect of yourself, your inner child. I always say, you know, if I was to talk to my inner child, and I do, and I ask it, you know, am I protecting you? Do you feel safe? You know, are you having fun? You know, are you still growing? You know, are you still exploring and things like that? And if in any of the areas the answer is no, then I need to do something about it. Sometimes it might be something as simple as changing my daily routine, or just changing my environment altogether, or, you know, disconnecting from some negative energies or connecting with some new ones, right? So, you know, really just checking into your ecosystem. I'm a firm believer that if you're surrounded by people and no one's telling you when you're messing up, find a new ecosystem. It's that simple, you know, and I've seen a lot of people damage children's lives. You know, we all have that inner narcissist in us, you know, which is why I love my MBK crew, because if I go off the bat, Mac is there to call me out on stuff. Jay is there. Mig, who's not here today, is there to be like, hey, that don't make no sense. I'm like, yes, it does. Like, no, it does not. And here's why. I'm like, yes, it does. And, you know, we'll have a back and forth, but it's great to have an ecosystem of people who you can literally know. If I was to call them right now and be like, hey man, I'm about to do a line of coke, they're going to come to my house and kill me because they're like, what are you doing? What are you, stupid? They're not going to say, yeah, try it out. Let me know how that goes for you. You know, so check your ecosystem, because if you're about to do something really stupid and you don't have somebody around you to really just talk about it, say, hey, what's your thoughts on this? You know, you're going to go off a deep end, you know. You know, understanding is not acceptance. When I talked about my father, Mac actually touched on a very funny point, because we're both Haitian, and, you know, acts of service is every Haitian woman's love language. You know, pick that up, do that, clean this, do this. Like, that's every Haitian woman's like acts of service. Like,
and they want it done right now.
Right. You know, my mom lives in Florida, and I cringe whenever she calls and says, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, damn, I got to do something. What? You know, like, it's an act of service, you know? But I think it's important to understand, you know, your family, like, you know, where they come from. My dad, you know, was an orphan, so I love you was foreign to him. He knew how to work. He knew how to protect. He knew how to provide. He knew how to be there. So, you know, my father was available. You know, when he caught me doing some crazy stuff, I won't tell you specifically what, my dad sat me down and read the Bible to me, and all I kept thinking was, just beat me, man. Damn, this is taking long. You know, like, you know, so it's like my father was there. You know, that's one thing that I have a lot of great memories about him. You know, some doesn't feel good because I got my ass handed to me, but I understood why he did it. You know, so, you know, buying me things that I needed, whether it was, you know, a box of socks or supplies for school or whatever, that was his way of saying I love you, because he didn't come from saying I love you. He came from expressing it, you know. So understanding and knowing that understanding is not accepting. And that's usually one of the hardships to get people through. It's like, no, understand where they come from. You're not saying you accept what they did or said or treated you. If you understand where a person comes from, then that's really how forgiveness works, right? And so that really leads to closure. Yeah. And that's really the goal, right? Because if you're going to grow past a certain stage, you have to graduate, right? Whether it's, you know, all of the different types of ways. Because, you know, you have, 4 parental styles, right? Authoritarian, authoritative, was it permissive, and was it uninvolved, right? So you have those 4 styles, and those 4 styles are going to create different people. You know, so if I met someone that came from a, you know, authoritative environment, and my parents, thank God, I don't come from this, you know, you have to become a doctor or a lawyer, like, facts. My parents was like, you're smart, you could do anything. And I was like, huh? You know, I was like, wait, no, tell me which way to go. They're like, no, really, you're so smart. Like, you know, aunties and uncles, you're smart, you could do anything. And I'm like, no, really, this is a big ass map. Like, tell me, point to a direction. You know, fast forward, I'm an adult, and I meet and have seen other adults, this huge pressure to be validated by titles and status and association. I got a Captain America shield in my studio to prove a point. I'm a big freaking kid. You know, yeah, I have my degree and all that other stuff. But there's different things about who I am that defines me. It's not those associations. And I have my parents to thank for that. Now, growing up, I was like, what the hell? Like, what kind of parents don't give you direction and structure and everything else? They were like, you're smart. What the hell, man? You know, like, I'm a grown adult. I'm like, thank you, God. I didn't have these, you know, like, over obsessed with parents who was just like, nah, here's God in school, go. And it's like, what? Really? You know, so just kind of understanding that, you know, and understanding that at the basis of it all, they didn't know any better. They didn't know any better. You know, what were their grandparents like? You know, I've seen that generational pattern, you know, in other families where the grandmother was a certain way. The mother turned out to be like the grandmother, and then the daughter. And if you look at the pattern, you're like, okay, wow. You know, so this is a pattern. Like, no one decided to break this. Nobody, you just move to Sri Lanka and start all over. You could break this damn pattern is all I'm saying, right? But no one's willing to do that. But just seeing those kinds of things and being aggressive and having an intentionality around changing and growing, you know, and I think that's really what it all sums up to. So that's what I have to say about that.
Jonas, can I add something to that?
Please.
Full transparency. My mom comes from the Haitian background. My father, he was mixed with white and black. And when you mentioned you know, our parents were learning. Not only were our parents were learning, our parents were still trying to process different things. Yeah. Like my dad grew up. I remember one conversation I had with my dad, it blew my mind. This was in adulthood. He said, my whole entire life, I felt like my blackness was on trial. And I said, what do you mean by that? I mean, you want to hear something crazy? He was born in 1955. His dad was white. His dad was an absentee parent. His mom was black. In his neighborhood, they used to call him Jesus because he had the long hair and he was so fair skinned, and he was almost treated like a mascot. But for him, he was like, here I am with the world telling me I'm biracial, yet all I know is my black side. Mm-hmm. And he said, I felt like, and this was his words, I had to be blacker than the black guys. And for him, and you notice that a lot, like with brothers and sisters like that. But my dad was the one who got me into like Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X and Dr. Maya Angelou, because, you know, at the beginning of a conversation, you see how you mentioned, you know, you go to intellectual. Like my dad, when you saw him, you kind of didn't know what he was, but immediately he tried to captivate you where, you know, where Marcus Garvey said this and Malcolm X said this, almost to try to get that acceptance from a culture that he only knew but never felt fully a part of.
Wow.
And when I heard my dad tell this story, and keep in mind, he was an absentee parent, so I had a lot of reason to continue my rage and my anger. But even in hearing that, I realized, holy crap, you know what? He was dealing with stuff too. You know, I can't even imagine going through my life. And you talk about being a nerd, I'm a nerd too. Think about the Jedi when they say, trying to find, where do I belong? And in this whole vast space of universe, imagine going through your life, not realizing, well, where do I belong? Where's my place in the full scheme of this? When Jeniece was talking about how her relationship with her father changed as she matured, I'm not gonna lie to you, it stung me a little bit, because one thing I used to really beat myself up for, and Jonas, you talk about your inner child. Even though my dad was an absentee parent, I missed him like crazy. Like me and my sister, we carried it differently. Like with him not being here, I felt that she just was always upset about it. While for me, I was always sad. You know, I missed him. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't tap into my rage. Like, why couldn't I be upset that he wasn't here? But I just missed him. And before I became a father, I said, hey, you know, if there's ever a moment to reconnect with him, it's now. Before I had my first son, I called him. We had an 8-hour conversation, and we talked about everything. And we began to heal. But even then, I had to make the first and the second and then the third step. And the one thing I kind of regret, and he passed in 2016, the one thing I still was never able to do emotionally was say, hey, when you was gone, this is how it made me feel. Like, it hurt me.
Wow.
You know, and I think the one part of the parental wound conversation that we're not having yet is, unfortunately, at times, especially when you got friends that have similar experiences, it makes you think what you went through was normal, or it makes you think the environment that you went through, well, okay, everybody's kind of going through it, so I guess it's okay. We have a lot of conversation these days about, let's normalize this, let's normalize that. One thing I always say, let's normalize the idea that you shouldn't have went through that. You know, that's not to give your parents a pass, and I know they were still learning, but you shouldn't have gone through this. And I want us all, not just all on this call, but even those watching, to be the generation to take those moments of self-reflection to number one, identify that wound, identify maybe how it's manifesting in your life, and realizing it doesn't have to continue. It doesn't. And when you're able to have those moments of self-reflection, you start to connect the dots. Maybe I'm like this because of that. And I know sometimes it's mind-blowing, but I read that we spend so much of our adult lives healing from childhood. Some do it a little bit quicker when they're able to identify that this is where that came from. Right. Others like, nah, it can't still be this. Not realizing, yes, it is. You never got over that. You never made amends with that. Your inner child is still hurting from that. I do believe in turning the pain into power, but you got to acknowledge it. And that's for women and men, especially for my brothers who think, nah, you know, I just man up and thug it out. No. I I've recently changed my mindset when I hear people say, you know, show up at your best or show up as the best version of you. We'll never get to the best version of us because we're always learning and always growing. But what you can do is start showing up as the healed version of you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Start showing up in these different spaces and your relationships. Show up healed. But and don't just show up looking healed. Show up healed. Do the work. Be able to say, damn, man, this really hurt me. And I regret that even in this passing, I never had the opportunity or the emotional courage to say, hey, Dad, when you was gone, brother, it hurt my feelings bad. Because the inner child in me, I ain't gonna lie to you, I was just happy to have it back. So I took any version of it. And sometimes even that's a problem in our relationships, where sometimes that desire for love, that yearning to be loved, will accept anything, sometimes even the bare minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not realizing how much we're just creating more work and more work and more work for ourselves afterwards.
Wow.
And brother, when you was talking, man, it was just electrifying my soul. You speak so beautifully, but I connected with a lot of what you were saying. And just an overall message is be able to acknowledge that, hey, you know what? This wasn't right. And I shouldn't have had to go through this.
Yes.
And take the necessary steps, and your steps and my steps and all of our steps are going to look different, which is okay. The pace might be also different. That's also okay. But do whatever you need to do to find how you're going to turn that pain to power and then to progress.
Yeah.
And that's that
I'm
alchemy.
sorry.
You know, no, don't apologize. That was beautiful. You had so many gems in that. And you just posted that today as far as don't show up as the looking healed, show up actually being
Healed.
Yeah, I thought that was fire. But I always say childhood lasts forever. So we don't ever necessarily grow up, you know, we just learn how to act. But the childhood, and not even just the negative aspects of childhood, but the positive aspects too. Just like Jonas said, you know, he's a big kid. Like, who's not really a big kid, at least inside? You know, some of us are just more comfortable with showcasing that part of ourselves than others.
Grace,
yeah.
Sorry, before you continue, there's a comment on the feed, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said, so much of our culture is normalizing pain. There's a huge hint, the person said, that's a huge hindrance of mine, feeling like I'm weak for not being over it. And that's kind of what we were just talking about, where sometimes you're like, why am I still being bothered by this? Wow. And you beat yourself down, not realizing our triggers sometimes is just an indicator of you still got some more work to do, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
But if it's still bothering you, that might mean you're not all the way over it yet.
Who said that? Shout him out.
Jay, I'm not gonna try to pronounce that last name, but it was Jay that just put that in there, and that's true because we do have the whole. Well, let me ask you, ladies, a question. For us, we have the y'all man up, man up. What's the woman version of man up? Like, what do women tell other women in terms of just getting over it?
Big girl panties on.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, put your big girl panties on the cue.
Big girl panties on.
What about you, Sharell? You was gonna say something?
Oh, to answer his question, stop complaining.
Okay.
Yeah, stop complaining. See, and me, I don't subscribe to any of that because, like I said, I'm very expressive when it comes to my emotions, and I encourage not just other women, but other people, period, to do the same. So I always hate when, you know, a loved one or someone of mine is like crying and trying to hold back tears, and maybe somebody's on the side going, don't cry, it's okay. You know, I hate that with the passion. If I'm right there, I'm like, girl, if you don't let it out, or boy, if you don't let it out, you know, we gotta let it out. And that just goes back to what we were talking about earlier, you know? So I don't even believe in the, now granted, at some point, I gotta get back to my G status and I gotta keep pushing forward. So don't get me wrong, right?
Got to.
You can't just, you know, wallow in your pain forever, but you have to allow yourself that space to just sit in misery, you know, for at least a second, you know, however long it takes you to process that. That's such a requirement in healing, in your healing journey, because that's where you get the answers. When you sit and you, I always say, and this is kind of relative to what we're saying, but I always say, like, prayer is talking to God. Meditation is listening to God. So you have to make room for that as well. You know, so when when we're crying, that's a form of communication with God. That's an expression. We're letting it out. We're watering our soul. But at some point, you know, before you get back to work, you have to sit there with it and let God speak to you. Let God reveal the answers to your soul that you need to get. Because when we're too busy trying to mask the pain, we don't get anything that we need in order to evolve and elevate to the next level. So that, I feel like, is a huge problem within our society. But I wanted to address, Mac, what you said in terms of, and Jonas, actually, you started this, as far as forgiving your parents. That starts with understanding, like Jonas suggested, but even further, that starts with self-awareness, because so many people don't even they can't understand, they can't fathom why my father did this to me, why my mother would allow this to happen to me, because they don't even take responsibility for their own toxic traits, for their own negativity, for their own shortcomings. So it starts with self-awareness. Once you learn how to be aware about yourself and the things that are going on with you, then you automatically within that journey go, you know what? I realize I'm not a perfect person. Dang, now I kind of see what my mom was going through. And those are the revelations that I have constantly, you know, being in toxic relationships and things of that nature. Now I'm going, I don't see my mom as weak anymore. I understand fully what she was going through. I understand that she was loving and doing the best she could. I may have felt neglected at times as a child, but she was wholeheartedly loving me in the only way she knew how, period. Mm-hmm. I had to learn how to stop taking it personal. That's what it was. I took it as a personal offense. Oh, you're doing me because I'm not good, or you're doing me that way because I'm not good enough, because I'm not worthy of the type of love that I need. You know, those are the thoughts that I had before I was healed. But now I'm like, okay, this isn't even about me. So since I started having those realizations, now I help her. I help her heal through the trauma that she's still going through. And she went through massive trauma as a young girl within her family, if we're talking about, you know, generational trauma. So it's beautiful when you're able to look back and see the pattern, because that gives you control to be able to say, okay, this is where it stops. So now I have a quick question, because I noticed a pattern here. So are all the men on this this call, are you guys all Caribbean? Because Jay, aren't you Jamaican, did you say?
Barbados.
I'm from Barbados.
Oh, Barbados, my bad, Barbados. Okay, so I want to, because, you know, I haven't heard from you at all yet. I want to hear about your experience as a Bajan. That's what they call people from Barbados, right? A Bajan? Yeah, what's your experience like? Is it similar to what Jonas and Mac were suggesting as far as how they grew up? Especially in terms of like love languages.
Similar in a sense, but it was really difficult trying to really process and think about parental wounds for me. Both my parents are very sweet, like loving, quiet people. Like, it runs in the family. Like, I'm quiet. My mom is quiet. My dad, he talks a lot. He's charismatic, but he has his moments where he's just peaceful. So I never really had a lot of negative experiences with them. But what I did realize and acknowledge was that their divorce did impact me and have an influence on how I looked at relationships, not just romantic relationships, but platonic relationships as well. I grew up believing that relationships were supposed to end at some point. So I didn't invest 100% in all of my relationships, because I figured, like, why get too close to someone? Why put all this effort in if it's going to end eventually? As I got older, I realized that me operating like that actually contributed to a lot of negative things happening in that relationship. So now, even though my perspective on relationships hasn't changed a lot, I give 100% regardless of how long or short that relationship is going to be. So that was what I learned from that process. But I did have a question for you guys. What steps did you take in order to identify and discover your own parental wounds? I think that people who are listening who might not be familiar or might not even understand what their own parental wounds would like to know. Like, what did you do in order to identify those things?
Oh, I can answer.
Go ahead.
So like you, Grace, I've always been an introspective person. Even as a little kid, I was always journaling and taking in stuff. And so for me, whenever something happened, I was always like, okay, what part did I play? How did I contribute to this? How did I get here? How did this happen? And like I said, the journaling helped me because it helped me. And I like to go back and look at things in the past, and I can look at something like 5 years ago and look at where I am today and see if I've progressed from there or if I'm still in the same point, and go back like, oh, okay, well, this is where it all started. So for me, that was always a big thing. But when it came to forgiving my dad, one of the biggest steps that I took when I knew I was ready to become a parent, because I was always kind of on the fence about whether or not I wanted to have a child or not. When I knew I wanted to become a parent for sure, I was very adamant that I did not want to make the same mistakes that my parents made. And by that point, my marriage was, I was just like, this is as good as it's gonna get. But I knew, I learned from there, okay, watching my parents' marriage and watching all the marriages around me, I knew what I didn't want, but I didn't know enough about what I wanted, which is how I wound up in my marriage. So I was like, I don't want to make the same mistake when I become a parent. So I decided to go on, I think I went on like a 5-day fast, because I was like, what's one of the biggest things that's hindering me right now? If I'm saying I don't want to make the same mistakes that my parents, especially my dad, made, what's one of the biggest things that's hindering me in that? And it was my anger towards my dad. I was still very angry with him for a lot of stuff. So I was like, I can't bring a kid into this world still carrying the anger that I have for my dad. So at that point, my dad still wasn't really able to like taking, you couldn't still, he wasn't at the point where I could tell him, hey, these are the things that I feel that you've done to me, and he'd take it in. So I was like, okay, it's not going to work that way. So I wrote a letter to him that I knew, I was like, he'll never read it, but I wrote the letter to him. And then I said, okay, I'm going to fast and go through there. And I think, no, it was a 7-day fast, because on day 5, I found out I was pregnant. And for me, that was the biggest thing. It was like, okay, because we're about to enter into a new chapter in our relationship. He's going to be the grandfather of my child. That's still my dad, and I love him. I might be angry with him, but I still love him. So how do I move beyond that? And that's when I started to, one, accept that this is who he is. He's never going to be the version of him that I want him to be. That's not who he is. And 2, that's when I started looking at my dad as more than just my dad. Like, oh, he's a whole human being. Wait a minute. Okay. And that's what started helping me get past all of that stuff.
So when your father did pass, were you at peace with everything that you got to tell him and didn't get to tell him? How was your relationship at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. So the beautiful thing about how our relationship evolved, like I said, I think me getting married, I think, was the start of it, because he hated my ex-husband. So I think that was, for him, me marrying my ex-husband made him very sad, because he was like, that's not what I wanted. Like, if you were going to get married, it wouldn't have been, that's not the man I would have chosen for you. And it got to a point, especially once it got to the end of my marriage, that it was bad. And that was the first time that my dad actually said to me, it's okay. Like, I was just a blubbering mess. And that was the first time in my life that I can ever remember crying and him not saying, shut up, you're weak. And he actually held me and said, it's okay. Wow. It's all right. I'm here for you. And that was a huge turnaround. And then becoming a grandfather completely, to where I was like, I'm sorry, sir, who are you? Where where's Bernard Jeffrey? Because you are not that man. Like, who is? And that's because, one, what I realized for him, he didn't think he was going to live to see his grandchild. My dad always said he wasn't going to live to be an old man. He thought he wouldn't live to see 50. So I think getting to that point made him look at a lot of stuff. And then when me working with him, we got to have a different type of relationship. So during my pregnancy, he and I would have a lot of talks, and he actually apologized to me. He said he himself, he was like, I was really hard on you when you were growing up. And he was like, Boops, I'm sorry. I didn't know. He was like, I was just trying to make you better for the world, but I realize now where I may have messed up.
Wow. And
that was just like, that's all. I was crying like Adam at the end of Color Purple, like, just, mama, it was daddy, it was just daddy, like, because that's all I ever wanted, was to know that he could love me the way that I needed to be loved. Like, by that point, I'd gotten, you do the best you can, but I was still like, man, this is what I need. Can you meet me here? Can you start to take the steps here? So that for me was huge. So by the time he died, we were in a great place. We were in that place where we were evolving into friends as well as father and daughter. So when he died, I felt like I'm complete. I have no unfinished business with him. And I was really grateful for that.
That is beautiful. And I was going to ask you too, did he ever admit to any of the wrongdoing that he did? So it's beautiful to hear that when he did pass, that was closure, Yeah. And it's like, well, I guess I have a question. So from the time that he apologized to the time that he passed, because you said he knew that he wasn't going to live long. Do you think maybe he apologized? I don't know how long that time span was, but do you think maybe he was kind of on a road to, like, maybe he knew intuitively that he didn't have much longer. So, he wanted to correct things before it got to that point. Was he aware, even at a subconscious point at all, do you think?
That's a very good question. And knowing him, he probably did, because his health started declining around 2004. That's when, like, you would hear the reports of him being hospitalized again for different reasons, because the medication for sarcoidosis and all the other ailments that happen. So when he apologized, I want to say it was either right before I announced my pregnancy or right after. So that was like almost 2 years before he died, because my daughter was born in 2006. So it was around that time. So he might have actually, on some level, felt like, I don't have much time and I want to make things right.
Wow. Well, I'm very, very happy to hear, because you don't hear that often. It's rare, honestly, unfortunately, that, once a parent passes, the child can actually say, I actually do have full closure and peace. And, that you were able to get what you wanted out of him before he passed. So that was beautiful, beautiful. And one thing also that you mentioned, and this goes back to Jay's original question, you mentioned journaling. And when it comes to, understanding the parental wound, I would say that is how I began to understand everything in regards to shadow work, including the parental wound, is writing it out, free writing, journaling, things of that nature. And even if, like, I know a lot of people aren't the type to, like, actually write or type things out, getting a voice recorder and speaking into it, and that's actually great, because now you can act like you're talking to the person you want to hear these things too. But you're just letting it out, just express it any way you can. And even, like I said earlier, crying is like, it's still a language when you don't have the words to articulate how you're feeling. I can't tell you how many times I just sit there and cry and just let myself cry until I do find the words. And sometimes I don't find the words, and that's okay too. So I think those are two things that really help me in terms of introspection, in terms of understanding trauma and the parental wound. Anybody else have any other, things that they turn to?
So
I think it was
for me,
sorry. Go ahead.
Not true. I'll go last.
No, go ahead. Ladies first. Go ahead.
For me, To be honest with y'all, this is amazing because I actually started the healing of my parental wounds 9 months ago. I had started seeing somebody, and he was actually a blast from the past, so even better. And I had to reflect on what was going on. Like, I really, like, why am I sitting up here acting this way right now? He ain't even done nothing yet. He ain't even in the same country as me right now. Like, why am I tripping? And I was in therapy. Well, I'm still in therapy, but I think around that time I had just finished working with Grace on some stuff, and I was also in therapy. And out of nowhere, we're talking about the relationship, and my therapist was like, you know, we never revisited what happened with your family. And then she was like, you need to talk to him. And I was like, what? And then my best friend called me out of the blue. Have you talked to your parents? I'm like, huh? So then I sat down and I did a word vomit. And
explain what that is. What's the word vomit?
Okay. So for me, the word vomit is when my mind is so chaotic and not the way that Sharell normally thinks, because I'm very that methodical with the way I do things. And for me, if it gets too much, because I don't cry, I was taught how to rein in my anger after putting 3 holes in a wall as a child. So then that's when I turned to writing. And so a word vomit is literally any word that comes to mind as I'm typing, I just put it on the page. It's never a full thought. It's never a full sentence. It's literally 1 or 2 words that match. And between each word, I'll put a period. I'll go back and read it. And then it'll turn into actually some form of narrative, if you will. So I did the word vomit, and I went back and I wrote a letter to my parent. And I held on to that letter for 2 days because I was nervous. I was very nervous. I didn't come up in a super strict household, but I came up in a strict household. And my parents were both late in life babies. So they were raised by older people. Like, my mom's father was born in the 1800s.
Oh, wow.
So they were still kind of working off that children are supposed to just sit there. You're not supposed to say anything. If you don't like what I did, you didn't like what I did. So I was nervous. I was scared. I was afraid that somebody was going to yell at me. There was going to be a blow up. I was going to get disowned. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I took the letter and I read it to my parents. I sat down and I read it to them. And in that letter, I said, I realize now that what y'all were doing was what you thought was best. Because one of my biggest problems was I've grown up overweight. And my parents saw that at a young age and they tried to curb it. But the way they tried to curb it was the way that made me hate working out until I hit 30. And so, you know, I sat down and I talked to them. I'm like, this is what happened. And I know y'all did the best you can. And I was like, but it's not helping me knowing that that was the best y'all could do, because I'm still suffering from this and this and this, and I'm 35 years old. Why am I still dealing with this? And that was the first time in 35 years me and my parents actually had a real conversation.
Wow. So they received it well.
Yeah. And they apologized. And I did not, I really didn't see that, especially from my mama. Did not see that coming, because my mama's spoiled. You know, she a baby of like 6.
Wow.
She don't apologize. She don't apologize. What's that mean? So, but like it was a genuine apology. Now, I'm not saying our relationship is all great now. Like, I'm still antisocial with everybody in life. But I was able to explain to them, this is why this didn't work for me, because my love language is acts of service. So when my mom comes to me telling me all this stuff, it means something to me, but it don't mean nothing to me. But then it's like, hey, yo, I just, I picked you up some oat milk, knowing that I'm the only person in the house that drinks it. I'm like, cool, good looking out. But that's because she did something, and they didn't understand that that was my love language. So it's very rare for me to tell my parents I love them, actually. I'm not very affectionate within my family at all.
Interesting. Are you
super affectionate? Yeah. Super affectionate in relationships.
Interesting.
But I wasn't affectionate, but I was like, you know, when I don't say, hey, mom, this was great, thank you for that, because she's words of affirmation, it hurts her feelings. I didn't know that hurt her feelings. So I was just like, you ain't seen me clean this plate? So like, that's what it took for me. I actually had to have conflict within one of my adult relationships for me to sit down and say, okay, what's really going on and why?
Wow. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Wow. And it's like, it's interesting that you say, so you're not, and I think I might actually be the same way, because when I think about it, I'm not very affectionate within my family as well, but I'm beyond affectionate. Like physical touch is my #1 love language in relationships. So that's something that I definitely want to explore at a later time as well. Mac, you wanted to say something?
I want to give my answer, and then there's 2 comments on the feed I want to go ahead and share with you guys and get you guys' thoughts on it. I'm a Sagittarius, so I've always been emotional. So interestingly enough, my emotional awareness started very young. The only thing about it is, while I knew exactly what I was feeling, I didn't know, well, why am I feeling this? You know, and I think my journey in addressing and acknowledging my parental wounds is when I began to start kind of connecting the dots a little bit and seeing these same scenarios that was making me feel a certain type of way. And one thing I realized in these last couple of comments, we talked a lot about apologizing. And there's so much that goes into a person acknowledging that they've done you wrong and then trying to take ownership for it. One thing I try to practice in my own fatherhood journey now is apologize to my boys, and I'm intentional about it and say, hey, you know, daddy made a mistake. I'm sorry. I remember my youngest son is 7 years old. I remember one time we was going to the movies. I'm just like Jonas. I'm a big nerd as well. We was going to go see a Marvel movie. I was so excited. Like, I couldn't wait. Grace, you know me on social media, so I had the matching outfits for them all laid out. And I go take a shower. I come back. I can't find my car keys. I knew my youngest son before I went in. You know, he was kind of playing with my keys a little bit. His name is Malik, but I call him Google. I'm like, Google, where's my keys at? He's like, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? You was playing with it. Where's my keys at? And I got all my boys searching for it. I'm getting mad because time is going by. Like, we can still make, you know, the later movie. I'm like, Google, where's my keys? And he goes, I think it's in your wallet. I'm like, all right, he just saying anything now. I'm like, son, I need you to think and go find these keys. This is Avengers movies. Don't ruin this for me. Where's my keys at? And he's like, I don't know, Dad. I think I put it in your wallet. And I'm like, how you gonna put your keys in my wallet? You know what I mean? So time went by to the point where we missed all the showings of the movies, and the night was essentially ruined. And I'm like, I'm almost like pouting like a kid. I'm like, man, y'all go to bed, man. You know, we'll catch a movie at another time. And I'm in my room. I'm still kind of mad, like, dang, yo, and my son done ruined the night. And just for S sugar honey iced tea and giggles, I'm like, man, let me go grab my wallet. I grab my wallet, and the keys are inside the wallet.
Oh.
And I kid y'all not. Again, keep in mind I'm a Sagittarius. I cried a little bit because I'm like, damn, yo, he told me the keys was in the wallet, man. And it's like, I was so angry that I thought he was just saying whatever. Just like, hey, Dad, the keys are, you know, on the roof. And I thought he was just saying anything. And as opposed to listening to him, he said it twice. I'm like, man, boy, go find me them keys. He was asleep, but it was just sitting on my heart. And I'm a kind of person that when sun is in my heart and is wrenching at me, I got to act on it. I woke him up. I brought him to my room. I said, Google, you told me the keys was in my wallet. It was in my wallet. Son, I'm sorry. You know, I didn't believe you. And you was right. It was in my wallet. And I'm sorry. He's 7 years old. He goes, Daddy, it's okay. I love you. And I give him a hug. But it's like in that moment, I kid you, at that point, I'm almost about to pass out. I'm tearing up so much. But I realized even at a young age, it's like I'm showing him, hey, I make mistakes too. And sometimes even as parents, when we're not afraid to humanize ourselves, because as kids, we look at our parents like they gods. You know, they can't make a mistake. And they didn't ask to be on that pedestal, but sometimes we just place them there. And so, but the problem is in that when they do what's wrong, it's like, it's magnified because you ain't supposed to be doing that. Because if anybody else is supposed to have my back, you're supposed to have my back. And that's why maybe that's why those parental wounds, they hurt so much, because of everyone else in the world that you could give a pass to kind of not showing up for us. It's like, not you though. You're supposed to be my one that I could always go to. Right. Not realizing our parents are also people too. To answer Jay's question before I get into these comments.
Wait, I need to shout you out real quick. Going back to your earlier comment, because you dress you and your sons all alike, and I always like when I tell you like the entire thing, like I can tell you're trying to keep them young for as long as possible, and I like
before they get to that age where it's like, nah, peace.
Yeah, sorry, like Dad, they all look like triplets, and including Matt quadruplets, going on their family fun outings, and I just love it so much. So no, I applaud you. You're an amazing father, and
for me, it's like, Grace, a lot of that is, I ain't gonna lie, like, these are things I wish I could have did with my dad.
Because you a big ass
These are experiences I wish I could have had with them. And that's another way of us healing those parental wounds, and simply saying, hey, you know what? My parents did their best. Here's where they kind of dropped the ball. Let me pick it up and maybe do it better. Right. And that's not a shot on them, you know, because again, I believe every generation, we're supposed to be transitional. We're supposed to see, okay, this is where the baton was at. Let me see if I can run just a little bit further, you know? And in the comments, and then I'll let somebody else take it. Somebody asked straight up, I want to heal my parental wounds. How do I start? And someone else asked, how do you know when you're actually healing the wound versus just observing and recognizing the wound? And I'll let you guys dive into that however you see fit.
I was saying, shout them out. I want to hear their names. I want to see who said what.
Jay Marks asked the question about how do you know if you're healing the wound? Okay. And Tara D is the one who said she wants to heal the wound, but how do you start? How do you begin to heal that wound?
I think that goes back. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jonas.
The thing that actually this ties into Jay's question. It'll also answer the two that you presented, Mac. I'm happy that you talked about crying. I started doing some of that work via trauma. First, it was when my father died, and that resulted in me going into a health kick, watching what I eat, staying away from certain foods. But obviously that wasn't enough, right? Because that was just my body. Then I started experiencing a lot of issues in my marriage. My wife left me. That was very traumatic based on the things that I discovered, which I won't disclose in this forum. But how I discovered them, I broke down and cried in my brother's arm. Oh. And that was actually kind of like the cracking of a shell for me, you know, because there's only been a handful of times that I've ever really cried, right? So that, of course, resulted in me seeking like therapy, sitting down with someone. And I really started looking at, and I was writing some of this stuff down as you guys was talking, like therapy plus also reading. I was checking in with some friends, hey, you know, who was reading that book, reading this book and everything else. And really just good friends versus spectators, and I call them news reporters and, you know, onlookers. Know the difference. Because sometimes you're telling people or people will literally seek you out to find out what's wrong with you so they can just have a cool story to tell their friends. And so really kind of looking at that, spirituality, not religion. I stepped away from various communities that weren't necessarily feeding my soul and helping me heal, or more or less was probably just more or less feeding the drama and keeping up to date. And indoctrination is a very dangerous thing, because sometimes indoctrination will say, it's okay to die a fool's death. Go on, it's fine. God loves you. You know, so being very, very like mindful of that as well. Sorry guys, my fellas know my cynicism. Just clearly you guys was ready. I apologize if I offended anyone.
You good.
You're fine.
But you know, the other piece that that really helped me towards healing was engagement. You know, I'm very affectionate with my siblings. We hug all the time. Someone's always leaning on somebody, things like that. Even if we have, you know, some sort of a, you know, friction or whatnot, we're still close, you know. you know, calling my mom calling me. I had a very funny conversation yesterday with my mother about like dating and stuff like that. And that's actually really funny. I won't do that to my mother because I like breathing, but you know, but just that kind of engagement. And I think really just practicing unconditional love. I think, you know, and it's scary for some people. Unconditional love is genuinely scary for some people, as I've learned. Unconditional love will make someone turn around and run in the extreme opposite direction of you. Be prepared for that. Because as you're healing, your ways become wider and wiser, right? And I say it this way, is that God is not in my heart because my heart has limits, right? Rather, I'm in God's heart because his heart is limitless. Okay, and so when I get to that place, then I can actually learn more in that space, right? And so if you read The Prophet, I highly recommend read The Prophet. It's actually the chapter on love. I just want to be clear, but give me credit for the paraphrase though, I'll take that. You know, but really just looking at that. And I think, you know, it's Mac talks about normalizing, and I think that the discomfort, right? Because vulnerability is a strength. Vulnerability is a skill. You know, it's just, where do you show that side of you? Right. You know, it's not for everyone. It really isn't. And there's aspects of all the personalities on this call right now, that's not for everyone. That's just the way it is. And so, you know, if you're gonna live in a glass house, then don't throw rocks, kind of a thing, right? So it's like, understand it's not for everyone. And so for those who are healing and seeking ways to heal, you know, there are baby steps, and that's exactly what they are. It's today you'll have a good thought, tomorrow you'll have a kind of thought, and then, you know, the next day you'll have another baby step, and then before you know it, you find yourself pacing yourself, and then, you know, you're running, and eventually you're flying. That doesn't mean that there won't be setbacks and things that'll challenge you, but you'll be a little bit stronger, you know, on that journey. That's my contribution.
That's beautiful. I
That was beautiful, man.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. And that's why I'm always on his case. Because when Jonas is in this mode right here, like, I love it when he's in his bag. I love it when he's in his bag.
Yeah, no, that was extremely helpful. And then also, to answer the comments, I just want to go back to what we just said. I'm not sure at what point they tapped in, but as Jeniece and I were talking about, as far as journaling is concerned, that's huge in terms of how to discover and work through your parental wounds. Does anybody really quickly have any other tips to give in that regard, how to heal from your parental wound? Or did we?
Yeah, I would say healing your parental wounds starts with, like everybody has said, looking within yourself. Mm-hmm. Like you really have to not be afraid to tell yourself the truth. And that's what it kind of boils down to. Like, nobody wants to look in a mirror. Nobody. Right. Because we see the things that we don't like. Like, one thing I've said before is, you know, it's very amazing how sometimes you come across people that are like, oh my God, I just hate liars so much. I can't stand a liar. Don't ever lie to me. They're the best liar you ever met in your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Facts.
That's real.
Because it reflects back on that part of yourself that you don't like.
Right.
And so that would be my advice, just coming from a person like me who, again, not very emotional at all. You have to look at yourself. I like the other two ladies on here, I'm huge with my introspection, to the point where my therapist told me I need to stop being so introspective.
You want so much, right. That is so real. I wholeheartly agree with that as well. And it's funny because my therapist just told me that last week, like, maybe you're doing a little bit too, you know, and I understand there's a happy medium between the two. You know, you have to actually live and kind of let yourself go a little bit at some point. You can't just, back to what I was saying earlier, everything can't be your fault. Everything can't be shadow work. You know, there has to be a balance. So no, I definitely agree with that. And I don't want to take up too much time, but I want to thank each and every one of you for sharing your experiences, your wisdom, and your knowledge today. Jeniece, you have been so amazing, and your words were so encouraging and so helpful. And hearing about your experiences, especially considering your father is someone that I can confidently say every single person on this call admire greatly, you know, despite his, his faults, of course. He was human, you know, he was a man of many words, but he was also an extremely wise man as well. And just to hear you speak about him in the light that you have, and, you know, in both regards, his flaws and his attributes, his gifts, it really spoke to my soul. So I want to thank you for being such an amazing, beautiful representation of Bernie, you know, so thank you. And then again, to my co-host, which reminds me, I do want to give a shout out to Miguel Sierra, our other co-host. He couldn't be here today, unfortunately, but we are holding it down. I believe we held it down pretty well in his absence.
He's all in the comments. He's here.
Yeah, he's in the comment section. He's in the comments.
He's here. He's in the comment section. Miguelito, he here.
Yes. To my brother's keeper tribe, to the goddess movement. You guys, like, I'm not even about to go in a tangent because, like, I was so emotional today in realizing how much support I have from the goddess movement and from MBK. So I just thank you all so much. This was such a soul-fulfilling conversation, and it was really needed. And right after this call, I'm going upstairs and getting in my journal, doing my introspective work once again. So I thank you all so much. Did anyone have any last things they wanted to say or anything?
We all mentioned moments of therapy here. Sometimes it's okay for you guys, I'm talking about for the people watching this, there might be some issues that it's too big for you. All three of us, in terms of my brothers here, we've all been in therapy as well. So it's a situation where sometimes be willing to understand that this might be bigger than me. And I would recommend therapy to any and everyone. Trust me, it can help you on many different levels. We talk about these wounds. There might be some wounds where it might just be too big for you. Don't be afraid to reach out and say, hey, certain things might be therapeutic, but for this, I might actually need therapy.
Great one. That's huge. That's a big deal. Absolutely. It's always good to have help. And I mean, you know, everybody, like, hopefully people do have a support system with family and friends, but there comes a time where you don't want to emotionally dump all your mess onto your loved ones. You know, everybody's going through their own trauma. Why not go to someone like a licensed therapist who is like, that's literally their job, and they don't even know you like that. So they're coming from a non-judgmental space. You know, you have a safe zone to be able to work through your issues without judgment. And so I highly encourage you all, if you are not in therapy, please entertain that idea of at least trying it, because it's so needed in our community. I can say it's helped me. You know, I've only been in therapy for a few months now, and it's already helping me tremendously. And I'm the type of person, like, I'm a self-healer 100%. Even going into therapy, I was like, can they really heal me like I can heal myself? Because I've come a long way all on my own. I'm a know-it-all type of person. Even with me, it has helped. Even if it's just having someone, again, to emotionally dump on, who can take it at that moment, it's a tremendous value. So with that, I will close out, and I want to say thank you. The Goddess Movement Community.com is where you can find us. This will be available on all podcast platforms. So again, thank you all, Jeniece, Jonas, Sharell, Jay, and Macadopoulos. Thank you so much, and thank you all for watching, and we'll see you. Next time, I forgot to mention, our next podcast episode, we're going to be featuring Kay Jones, the owner of She Orgasms, and we're going to be talking about how to build intimacy and a thriving sex life. So that's going to be really, really interesting. And as you all know, our podcast is about bridging the gap between the divine feminine and divine masculine. So we're super excited, and we'll see you all next time. Okay? Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, everyone.